A relationship with the right referral partner could be a game changer for any B2B company. So, what if you could reverse engineer these relationships at a moment's notice? Start a podcast, invite potential referral partners to be guests on your show, and grow your referral network faster than ever. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to B2B Growth. I am your host for today's episode, Nikki Ivy with Sweetfish Media. Guys, I've got with me today Chris Walker, who is CEO of Refine Labs. Chris, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Nikki. Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Man, me too. So if you pay attention, if you've been watching some of the conversations happening on LinkedIn and in your network, then you've no doubt heard these sort of two different camps about brand marketing and its value, right? Chris has been talking about how, listen, a lot of the time, you're not going to be able to measure and attribute the value and ROI of these things in the same traditional way, which doesn't mean that they're not worth it, right? In fact, quite the opposite. But I won't speak for Chris. I'll let you dig into that for us. But before we do, I'd love it, Chris, if you would just give us all a little bit of background on yourself and what you and the folks at Refine Labs have been up to these days.
Yeah, absolutely, Nikki. So I started Refine Labs about 6 months ago after working in a variety of different B2B companies that range somewhere from 500K ARR to up to about 50 million. And during that time working in-house for about 7 years, I noticed that companies were making a lot of the same mistakes, typically what revolves around the go-to-market strategy and how the internet and how buyers are changing about how they discover, research, and buy products. And so over the last 3 years of my career, I worked on different ways to solve that issue for them, which involved less reliance on outbound and more a greater mix in brand marketing and other marketing channels to drive inbound lead flow to kind of stabilize their pipeline and give them a platform to grow more efficiently. And now, for 6 months, we've been working on building out this model for a variety of B2B companies, and it's an interesting positioning, I think, which is that we operate kind of like half a consulting firm where we provide the strategy, ongoing guidance, advisory, and long-term vision, and then half execution. And so I think it's an interesting model as we continue to explore it and work with different companies and find that works best. And so, yeah, that's what we're up to. Things are great, and looking forward to diving into this topic with you.
Yeah. What a cool little idea, like this hybrid, like you said, of, expertise and execution, right? And there's certainly the lane is open for that because most folks that I'm familiar with are doing one or the other. So good on you. And with that, with your experience, no doubt that you've had with your clients and with prospects and just in this journey of building this, you've encountered these two camps that you and I talked about offline when it comes to, how you market your organization. And that's performance marketing and brand marketing. And I like the way that you frame this up. It's less about difference in, how folks are applying tactics and more about a difference in mindset and how folks understand the function of these two very, very distinct ways of marketing. So dig into that for us.
Yeah, I mean, the core difference that I see is the mindset and then how it's being measured. And so if we look at how people would approach marketing, a lot of people approach it from, we need to do whatever we need to do to get those MQLs to pass to sales. And when you think like that, your actions follow suit. When you have that goal in mind, it's short-term focused. It's selfish, typically. The content, people can feel that you're trying to sell them something inside of it. And I don't think that creates a good experience for the buyer. And also, I don't think that it creates great results for the company. And so if you look on the other camp, that we would call it in brand marketing, we're trying to do the exact same thing. We're trying to drive brand awareness, which leads to pipeline creation and revenue growth at an accelerated rate. We're just doing it in a very different way. And because our mindset is not in order to get the MQL, what we do is we actually create content that resonates with the audience and helps them, which then creates trust and credibility and brand affinity and leads to better results. And so I think there's a place for both performance marketing and brand marketing. And I think that people sometimes confuse or mix the two, and I don't think it hits when you do that.
For sure. My question is, folks are starting to see, or have been seeing for the past few years, that this, chasing leads and doing these performance marketing efforts, while it may lead to more leads, isn't necessarily leading to more closed deals or even more opportunities. Why is there still such a loyalty to that, as far as what you've seen?
I mean, to be direct, I think that a lot of companies are sales-driven companies that have a lot of salespeople and a lot of mouths to feed, and would rather have 100 quote unquote leads to follow up with that get you the activity metrics that you're looking for, even though a lot of them aren't going to close to revenue. I think that there's really a mindset shift that has to be made. And another side of it is that I don't think that a lot of B2B companies know how to do brand marketing in order to get the results that I'm talking about. And so if you can't do brand marketing well and therefore justify the activity, then you're going to get pushed to do sales-driven performance marketing either way. And so I think it's half about kind of who's calling the shots inside of the company, but the other half is that you got to be able to do this well in order to move to the brand marketing focused model.
I'm really interested in I'm going to get to what doing it well looks like, but I want to talk about something that you said that's really interesting to me. When people talk about vanity metrics, more often than not, they're talking about it in terms of marketing. I don't think there's been enough folks who have been exposed, frankly, in terms of these vanity metrics that sales is absolutely manipulating a lot of the time, right? And the number one, like you talked about, a vanity metric in sales is activity. It can make it really look like I've got this, this team full of salespeople, and they are dialing all day long, and they're sending out all these emails, and they're trying to engage folks. And so they're hard at work, but what does that amount to at the end of the day? Right. And we can sit here and point the finger and say, well, it's because marketing didn't get them good enough leads. But at the same time, that's because sales just kept asking for volume, for quantity over quality. Do you know what I mean? So there's got to be, like you said, this sort of shift in figuring out which is which, what the goals are for each of these different types of marketing, who is responsible, and what we're actually looking to get out of them. So talk to us about that. What does getting brand marketing right look like?
That's a loaded question. And I kind of want to address one of the topics that I thought that was interesting about something that you said in there. And then we'll get to what good brand marketing looks like and how to get started on it. In relation to the sales activity metrics, I talk about this as something that I think is broken in companies because I've seen it at a lot of companies and I have figured out how to fix it. And so I'll give you an example. Work at a company, they have 8 SDRs, they have 50 field-based sales reps. The SDRs are making calls into the companies. They're setting appointments. Then the sales rep takes the appointment, and the rep owns all of Kansas. So he takes wherever he is in Kansas, drives 6 hours to the appointment the SDR set, probably stays overnight at a hotel, does the presentation the next day to somebody that had almost no interest in buying. Those deals close at somewhere between 2 and 4%. And I don't want that to be happening at scale across the 50 reps. I'm just looking at it logically for what's best for the business. Mm-hmm. And so like especially in a field-based model, but it certainly applies to an inside sales model too. I would rather be able to be doing 5 demos and winning 3 of them than have to do 300 demos and win 3 of them. And that's just basic logic. But for some reason, volume is what we're going for, because I don't think that we understand that at scale, we understand how to make that more efficient. Everything on the efficiency side is little bits of sales process optimization that are going to get you little bits of percentage points better, little like incremental. And I'm looking for things that completely change a business model. And so what happens is that when you need to do 50 demos in order to win 1 sale, you end up having a very, very overweight sales force in order to hit your goals, because you have an inefficient model, which therefore takes away from your investment in marketing to do some of the brand stuff that we're talking about. It strains the organization from being able to invest in product. It strains the organization from being able to invest in success. Mm-hmm. When you can't invest in success, then you don't have the base of evangelists that are going to be driving the word of mouth, which then completely changes your overall growth model when you have a ton of happy customers. When you can't invest in product, you start slowing down and you start losing competitive advantage amongst the competition. And when you can't do the brand marketing, you just get stuck in this really tactical sales engine. And I think there's just a better way. I just think there's a better way to do it.
Imagine it, a spreadsheet filled with rows and rows of your sales enablement assets. You've devoted 2 years to organizing this masterpiece, only for it to stop making sense. This was Chad Trabucco's reality. As the head of sales enablement at Glint, a LinkedIn company, he's responsible for instilling confidence in his sales reps and arming them with the information they need to do their jobs. However, when his glorious spreadsheet became too complex, he realized he needed a new system. That's when Chad turned to Guru. With Guru, the knowledge you need to do your job finds you. Between Guru's web interface, Slack integration, mobile app, and browser extension, teams can easily search for verified knowledge without leaving their workflow. No more siloed or staled information. Guru acts as your single source of truth. For Chad, this meant Glint sales reps were left feeling more confident doing their jobs. See why leading companies like Glint, Shopify, Spotify, Slack, and more are using Guru for their knowledge management needs. Visit b2bgrowth.getguru.com to start your 30-day free trial and discover how knowledge management can empower your revenue teams.
I agree. I think it's what's funny is I've seen a lot of individual contributors as salespeople, not knowing how to articulate what you just said, but really begging for it, right? Really, mm-hmm. We thought we wanted a higher volume of leads. What we really wanted was to be talking to folks who were more aware and qualified in the first place.
Ready,
that's what we wanted.
Ready, right? Exactly. Like it completely changes the dynamic of a conversation, whether you're talking to someone that has no interest in talking to you and is looking to learn it a little bit more, versus the person that's 70% of their buying process either is coming in so that you can help them figure out how to get that in their company and how to be successful during that buying and onboarding process, versus needing to convince someone that your solution is the right one for them. And it just, from a sales perspective, mm-hmm. like life is way easier when you're talking to people that are already convinced that your product or the category of the product that you're selling is already a solution that they're ready to solve. And you don't usually get there from a cold calling perspective, because you have created their buying process artificially versus them figuring it out for themselves. Yes, it happens, but nowhere near at the level that can happen from a different model.
What I love is that so much of your experience is as a marketer. I mean, you founded and your CEO is your official title at at Refine Labs right now, but just talking to you, marketing is, in your DNA, it sounds like. And a lot of the things you're saying are maybe things that, an SVP of sales or even an individual contributor salesperson might not feel like they were allowed to say, right? Because if you say out loud as a salesperson, anything other than I'm not, closing deals because I'm doing something wrong. I'm not closing deals because I didn't follow the process. I'm not closing deals because it's all my fault and there's nothing else that can be done in the process around me. Then you can be, people will treat you mean, they act like you're weak, like you can't really handle it. When really all you're saying is, I would like to work smarter, please. Thank you very much. And so I love this inflection point that we're at right now where marketers are infiltrating sales, introverts are infiltrating sales roles and things like that. Yeah.
A lot of companies out there are failing their sales reps, setting them up to fail based on the go-to-market model that they've created.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
And I think if we just let a little bit to sit there, like the way companies go to market, like in a Salesforce 1999 model that worked, that is far less efficient, is far more expensive, it doesn't get you where you need to be because people don't buy things like they bought Salesforce in 1999. And Salesforce got there, and a lot of people follow the model, and most of the executives running companies aspire to make the next Salesforce, so they do it the same way. But things are different, and I think that if we think about that statement I just made and let it sink in for a minute, and you logically assess your own business and where you're investing and the activities that you're doing, and you take a hard look at it, I think that you might find some things that you do differently.
For sure. So now's the time for you to let us know.
That's right.
I have to know, man, this is what I came here for. What does it look like? What does well-executed brand marketing look like? And since the traditional measures of, justifying these efforts don't work here, what do we hold up in its place?
Yeah. I mean, to start, I think that the traditional forms of brand, like when people think about brand marketing, they don't have the same definition that I have. And so the things like putting a big sign above your 20 by 30 trade show booth is not brand marketing. It was in 1980, but it's not anymore. Putting your logo on a display ad that nobody clicks and studies show that they barely even see them, I don't think makes the impact. Yes, you're going to get the aided awareness recall of your brand, and some data scientists can measure it and claim that you may move the needle. But what I'm looking for when I talk about brand marketing is, how do we communicate with someone, understand them so well that the information that we provided them was valuable, created credibility, and created an affinity to our brand, which then later leads to something that we want to have happen. And you can do that in a variety of ways. The things that I think work best today are long form video and audio, distributed in the right way, right? So a lot of people make videos and then post them on YouTube and don't search optimize them, and they get 6 views and they send them in an email that nobody clicks on. And that video, whatever it cost them to do, was a waste of money because people spend too much time creating content and not enough time figuring out how to distribute it. Mm-hmm. And then the last piece is that it's actually step one. So let's back up. Step one, know the audience deeply that you're trying to talk to. Most people don't do this. It's easy for me right now because I have been in companies for 7 years. I understand what those people are going through. And so I have it's easy for me to communicate to that audience because I am a peer. But if you're a company and you're a marketer and you're selling a product to engineers at Tesla and other companies like that, and you don't take the time to go and understand what they need, where they spend their time, how they consume information, what they care about outside of your value proposition, then your content's never going to hit. And so I think a lot of companies miss that step. They think that they do it because they listen to sales call recordings and get second party information feedback from the sales team. The sales team is measured on short-term metrics, nothing long-term. So they see the response from the customer and interpret it in a different way than a smart strategic marketer would. And so the only way for a marketer to have that type of insight, to know how to communicate with these people and create the things that they want, is to go out on their own to 10 prospects and 10 customers and talk to them and understand what they care about and recognize that the product that I'm trying to sell them is 1% of what they actually do. And all of the value is in understanding what the other 99% is, because that's how you do good content marketing.
Straight up. It takes all of the things that happen in cold outreach, or even in outreach that has, that's based on some intent data. All of the things that turn people off about that kind of outreach sort of fall away if folks do what you're talking about. I talk a lot about, especially when I've worked for a couple of organizations where, they were trying to penetrate these sort of legacy markets, right? Folks that had been using the same software they've been on since the 90s, folks who are convinced that their business runs on, handshakes and word of mouth, and weren't necessarily wrong, but just were wrong about where those conversations were taking place. Anyway, you're right. You have to become a part of that industry, straight up. You cannot be a vendor into that industry, or else that's all you will ever be. And you'll constantly be running into conversations about price and conversations about loyalty they have to this other vendor who maybe isn't serving them well still, but they just know better. So there's no easy way around it. You just have to really, really give a F. You know what I mean?
I know.
And get in there. And part of what I've been doing is, trying to listen to podcasts that folks who I want to do business with listen to, read what they're reading, and then get into conversations, ask them questions, like you said, about what are you talking about to your network, right? What are the things that are on the minds of the people who do what you do beyond what my solution can address? And that's it.
Totally.
It's not a hack. It's like being a whole human, right? It's like being a whole present person. But we operate in such a time, especially on platforms like LinkedIn, where there's such a volume of hot takes, and then there's such a pressure. Those hot takes do well, right? Those hot takes do good numbers, right? They're getting a lot of engagement, and so then there's
engagement,
pressure
comments,
right?
Yeah.
Right. So then there's this pressure, if you do want to become a part of the community, to do the easy thing and just, talk at folks and give them hot takes versus asking more questions and seeing what's really up. Yeah, I like the way you laid this out. I'm not surprised. I knew when I asked you to be on the show that there was going to be some value here. I want to give you a chance before I move on to the next segment to let the folks know any other little things that you think are important when it comes to understanding the distinction between performance marketing and brand marketing when it comes to B2B.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I've been thinking a lot about, and I'm trying to figure out how to articulate this, is that all of the things that I do that work for me, people try and think about what the ROI of what's the ROI of me spending 2 hours a day answering comments on LinkedIn for people asking me questions and sending me messages. And most people would think, you're running a rapidly growing company. Why would you be spending 2 hours answering questions for people that are never going to buy from you? And I think people really need to think about it. I think about this long term. I started this business 6 months ago. I plan on having it for a while. It's not venture funded. I'm not trying to sell it. I don't have investors to answer to. I don't care if we get to the revenue target that we set next month, because I am playing for the long term. And so answering those comments and messages do a couple things for me. One, it builds brand. When I help someone and impact them, then they go and tell someone else. And I see people come in, inbound connection request. Hey, Susie told me about you. She answered that question, would love to connect with you. And when that starts happening 100 times a day, you start to know what you're doing is working. And so that's one thing. The second piece is that it's real-time market research. I test messaging. I test handling objections. I test understanding how I position our offering, all inside of little conversations and dialogues inside of LinkedIn. I know whether or not what I said resonated for someone or if I need to change it. Those are all things that helped us go from not exactly knowing what our offering was 6 months ago to rapidly getting more clear on exactly where to focus and where we add value for companies, which could have taken a lot more time and a lot more money had I done it a more traditional way. And so I don't know how else to say this, but the things that I recommend to every company, I do myself.
Got it.
Like, we run the exact same marketing model inside of our company that we recommend to everybody else, with the intention of when somebody comes inbound to us on LinkedIn and becomes a 6-figure client in 5 days, they just experienced exactly what their customers should experience in their sales process when we do it right.
Absolutely. You're preaching to the choir. We do that here as well at Sweetfish Media.
Mm-hmm.
And there's really I forget the exact way that Don Draper phrased it, but he basically said, like, I can't teach you Jesus, right? Like, I can't make you a believer if you're not, if you don't come to the conversation already with the capacity to think differently, and there's nothing I can do for you, man. And you just might just miss the boat. And so I like the sort of proof is in the pudding way that you talk and think about what you're doing here. So now, Chris, that I've successfully picked your brain and seen what I could get out of it, it's time for you to tell us about what you're putting in it. So talk to the people about a learning resource that you are engaging with that is informing your approach that's just got you excited these days.
Yeah. So a couple of my influences that I think are interesting is, one, I watch a lot of B2C brands that work for me and understand what they're doing from a marketing, positioning, content perspective. I reverse engineer why it works on me, and then I apply it to what I want to do. Super interesting. It's really, really worked for me, and I'll give you an example. So I'm maybe like 3 or 4 years ago, I'm going through Instagram stories. At that point, Instagram stories were actually pretty new. I go through whatever they were trying to sell me hits me with a 15-second video that was super compelling. And then I take a mental note of that, understand where they were trying to drive me to, understand what was positioned in the creative and why it caught my attention inside this. And then I repurpose that and use it to market medical devices.
Solid advice. And so I know, Chris, that everybody listening, just like me, has become a fast fan of yours, and they're going to want to know how to keep up with you. So tell the people how we can connect with you.
So LinkedIn's the best. Chris Walker, very popular name, but the headline would be CEO of Refine Labs. So I hope you can find me, but that's the place where I spend most of my time right now.
Perfect. He's out there. His content is fire. Check him out. Thank you again so much, Chris, for coming on the show and helping us demystify this distinction between performance marketing and brand marketing. Thanks so much, man.
Thanks, Nikki.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big 3, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.